Hi everyone, welcome along to the Comet 24.11 Dione release webinar. My name is Mason. Thanks for joining us. I'm coming to you live today. It's 9 AM here in New Zealand, so good morning or good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. To make the time zones easier, you're welcome to subscribe to notifications about when we go live. It's all on the webinar platform and you can get a notification that shows you in your own time zone when our next presentation will be. And after the webinar, we will post the recording on YouTube. So if you're watching this replay on YouTube, then hi, hope the future's cool. But if you're live with us this morning, then thank you for coming along. And as a special thank you for making the live time slot, we are doing a live question and answer session. We'll take questions as we go. So on the webinar platform, there is a chat widget and question widget on the bottom right of the screen. Just click the button to pop it open. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, just write them in and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. If you are a long time watcher of this series of technical webinars, welcome back. This is episode 31. And if you're a brand new watcher, then let's start off with just the essential Comet background information. So in Comet, there are 2 release tracks for Comet. Every week we publish our absolute latest changes as part of what we call the Voyager rolling release series. And 4 times a year, that sort of rolling development all gets bundled up into one new major quarterly release. And we've found that strikes a really good balance of getting early access, early feedback, and then that builds up into something that our company then qualifies, supports for a longer period of time. And so by the time you get this quarterly release, all of these changes have already run the gauntlet, they're battle tested, they're ready for production. And it's up to you which track you follow. For the majority of our partners who do follow the quarterly releases, we have just done that bundling up. And so we're very proud to have launched our latest 24.11 Dione release. And so that rolls up all the changes we've made in Voyager throughout September, October, November. So that process wound up in November. So you can see our version numbers are 24.11 being year and month. Today we'll be covering the changes and features we've added since the last 3 months. So that's it about the version number. And the code name for this release is Dione. And this release is named after one of Saturn's moons. All of our releases are named after solar system objects. We started with Mercury many years ago, and we've sort of been moving outwards through the planets and asteroids ever since then. Dione is a moon of Saturn. These are your space facts. It was discovered by Cassini in the 1680s. And so there's a big frozen crust on the moon. And scientists believe that underneath that frozen crust, there may be a subsurface ocean, much like Enceladus, the other moons around here. And this hidden ocean means, there's a chance for life. It's not exactly a tropical island, but, life exists in some pretty extreme places on Earth, so can't rule it out. Might be here unless we go look. And there's so much space geology going on here. In this picture, the scarring at the bottom, these are massive cliffs of ice. So it's really incredible. And there's even bigger cliffs on the backside. But enough about the name and the moon. What about the features? So in the changelog for this release, we've listed 11 new features and 16 enhancements. And so in today's presentation, we'll go into detail about these features and what's new when you upgrade from the previous quarterly release, 24.8 Tethys. Now, this presentation today will probably be about 30 minutes long, more or less. And that's including some time for those questions at the end. I know everyone's busy, so thank you very much for coming along. We'll try and keep to that schedule. Hope you've got a coffee, get comfortable, settle in, and we'll just get underway. So if you have seen any of our other marketing this quarter, this is our headline feature for the Dione release. And this is a new feature that lets you back up entire disks and partitions on your Linux device for full system recovery. If you're at all familiar with Comet's existing disk image protected item type on Windows, it's basically the same. So a complete system backup, bare metal at the disk level. So this is a screenshot from the Linux GUI client, but of course on a headless Linux server, if you only have SSH, you can configure the whole thing remotely from the Comet server without needing a GUI. And so here you can see the available disks and partitions. In the screenshot, it's a pretty ordinary virtual disk. But the backup works in much more complicated situations too. It works for any block device, so it has full support for backing up LVM, MD-RAID, LUKS encryption, and so on. You can back up all of these special partition types at either layer, depending on your restore scenario. So this is bare metal backup on Linux. Restore anywhere. So all of Comet's disk image restore features are fully available. So you can bring your system back to life as quickly as possible. So when you go to restore data in Comet and you select a disk image backup, these are the options you're presented with. So the first option here, restore to physical devices. This lets you restore the disk image right back to the disks. So maybe you're doing a rollback, or you've had a disk failure and you need to replace the disk with its contents from the backup. This will rewrite the partitions byte for byte, so the PC can boot back into its backed up state. The second option here, restore as virtual disk files. This lets you restore the disk image backup as a virtual disk file. And once you have the virtual disk file, you can boot it in a virtual machine, or you can upload it to Azure or AWS and boot it in the cloud. And the third option here, granular restore. So granular restore is a great option if your PC is mostly fine and you just need to restore some individual files and folders. So this reaches into the backup, into the disk image inside the backup, and then into the file system inside that, and pulls out individual files that you need. So there's a bit of overhead, but it's extremely convenient. And in the past, our granular restore feature only supported NTFS on Windows, but we have extended this feature to support many common Linux file systems, primarily ext4 and XFS. So granular restore now works out of the box for most common Linux distributions. So Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Fedora, Arch, CentOS, Alma, Rocky, any of the big distros that use ext4 or XFS file systems will just work with granular restore. Now, so far, this has all been pretty much the same functionality as Windows disk image, bare metal backup, these restore options, granular restore is available. So all pretty much the same as Windows disk image if you've used that. Now, here is something different. Backing up a disk image is a little bit more complicated in some ways than backing up files and folders. When you back up files, it's important that you capture all the files at the same single point in time. But depending on your use case, that may or may not be essential. For a disk image backup, it is absolutely essential that you get a point-in-time snapshot. It is non-negotiable. And on Linux, the technology for this is called LVM2 snapshots. And if your system was set up to use LVM, then Comet will work with it out of the box. And this is the case for a lot of modern Ubuntu and Red Hat sort of installations. But in our experience, there's a lot of Linux devices out there where we've just got, file system on the partition, no LVM in the middle. And without LVM, there's no native snapshot capability, but you do need it for a high fidelity backup. So Comet is bundling an additional disk snapshot driver, which we call Backup Snap 6.1. So Backup Snap 6.1, this driver is Comet's specialized version of the open source BlockSnap driver. And in the 24.11 Dione release, the driver installer ships alongside Comet inside the install directory. So you run backup snap install, and that's away. You're away laughing. And suddenly Comet is able to take block device snapshots of any file system, any partition, any block device. So you'll be able to get that snapshot capability. And the snapshot capability is important for two reasons. Firstly, that consistency. And that consistency is just so important for a disk image backup being usable at all. But secondly, if you're able to take a disk snapshot, then something quite special happens. It means Comet can look at the file system in that snapshot and see what parts of the file system are used or unused. So say you've got a 100 gigabyte partition and with only 20 gigs of files on it. This means Comet can read those files and then super efficiently skip over the remaining 80 gigs, which massively improves the backup performance. So definitely want to make sure that you install the snapshot driver or have LVM set up for massively improved performance. And so for that speed up to work, you need a working snapshot, either LVM or this backup snap driver installed. And the file system has to be something that your kernel knows how to report free space information of, which as of Linux kernel 4.12, 4.12, which is, maybe 10 years old now, you've almost certainly got it. Kernel 4.12 and later can report this information for ext4 and XFS. So once again, just focusing on ext4 and XFS as the most common file systems for Linux with the most functionality, fast backup jobs, and also this granular restore that I mentioned earlier. So the last point to know about Linux disk image, and this is the same as Windows disk image, is you can't replace an engine while it's running. If you want to do a physical restore, restoring this backup back to bare metal, that's fine, but you need to run that restore from inside some sort of operating system, and you can't do heart surgery on yourself. We have this feature in Comet called Recovery Media, and Recovery Media lets you create a mini operating system to boot into. So if you're on a laptop or a server, you can use this feature to create a bootable USB stick, and you can boot into that and then do the restore from the USB drive. In Comet 24.11 Dione, there are various options available for you here, and regardless of whether you make a Windows USB or a Linux one, either of them can do a Windows or Linux physical restore. So you can mix and match based on what you're comfortable with. So that's Linux disk image, available now in Comet 24.11 Dione. Thank you to everyone who tried the feature in Voyager and gave feedback. And a special thanks to everyone who tried the early access pre-Voyager version that was shared to voters in the feature voting system. So if you haven't seen this system before, I'll just give a very quick summary. This page is available from the resources menu in the Comet account portal system. And in this page, you can request new features or upvote features that other people have requested. And if you upvote or comment on a feature, you'll get notified when the feature is completed or if anything significant changes with it. So it's a great way to get notified when new features are available. We look at the system often. We do develop ideas from in here. And when I looked at this 2 days ago, we were up to 188 completed features, 188. Of your ideas, community suggested ideas that we have gone out and built and shipped in Comet. So we look at the system often to help guide and prioritize what we should be developing next. It's not the only thing we base our decision making on, but it does play an important part, so please check it out. Next slide. A few new improvements for Comet's Hyper-V support. So we all know VMware changed hands recently, and since then there has been a lot of interest in Hyper-V, as well as a few other platforms that have been mentioned a lot in the feature voting system. We're paying attention, of course. Comet has supported Hyper-V for many years, and so recently we've put a bit of time and effort into our Hyper-V support for 24.11 Dione, and there's some cool things to know about. First of all, if you do a disk image backup, you can now do a physical to virtual, P2V, straight into Hyper-V VHDX files. So when you do a disk image backup, just select this new option here when going to restore that disk image backup. So either Windows disk image or Linux disk image can be converted to Hyper-V VHDX. And this file format conversion happens on the fly as part of the restore. It requires no extra temporary disk space, no extra memory, and actually no extra time either. It's just as fast as restoring in any other format. And the resulting VHDX file can be used immediately in Hyper-V, or you can upload it to Azure and boot it in a cloud virtual machine. And so this joins our existing support for restoring these disk image backups to ESXi, VMware's VMTK files, which works in the same streaming way without any temporary disk requirements. Another one for Hyper-V this quarter. So I mentioned granular restore earlier. Granular restore, the feature to extract individual files from a full partition block level backup. And so granular restore, since we have this feature, it means you can back up just the whole disk image and still maintain the ability to rapidly recover individual files. When you do a Hyper-V backup in Comet, there's a few options for Hyper-V backup. The two main options are you can choose latest VM state, and that will give you fast change block tracking support for a fast backup, or you can choose all VM checkpoints, and that will include the historic checkpoints for the VM, not just the latest VM state. And if you choose all VM checkpoints, that means when you run the backup will leave you with a Comet job snapshot, and inside that job snapshot there will be everything that Hyper-V normally has, the base VHDX file and a chain of differencing disks in a VHDX format. Up until now, there was a limitation in Comet that meant only the base VHDX was supported for granular restore. And so for many service providers who want to know if you actively maintain your checkpoint trees and for every Hyper-V VM, it could mean that only a surprisingly older base VHDX was available for granular restore. And ever since Windows Server turned on automatic checkpoints, I bet there's a lot of people not paying too much attention to old checkpoints. So in Comet 24.11, this limitation has been lifted, allowing you to perform granular restore even from each AVHDX checkpoint file. So all of your VHDX and AVHDX checkpoints appear as folders in the granular restore picker. You can see here in the screenshot. And so you can look inside any checkpoint and extract granular restore files from any checkpoint in the backup. Next slide. Overwrite read-only files during restore. So when you go to restore data as files and folders, when you restore files in Comet, one of the options here is to control what happens if you restore data over the top of existing files on disk. And in particular, this happens a lot if you're using the restore to original paths feature. That puts files right back where they used to be. There's a few different options you can pick for overwriting existing files. The default option is to restore the file and replace what's there, but only if the file is different. And so Comet does a quick check to see if the files are different, and then it can save time and not re-restore, if the file is already the same. And then there's the classic always overwrite and never overwrite options. This last one, skip overwriting, is useful in particular if you have most of your files and you've kept working on them, and then some are missing. You just want to restore everything that's not already present. So these options have been available in Comet for a while. But something interesting that happens is even if you instruct Comet to overwrite existing files on disk, an issue can occur if the existing file on disk has been set as read-only in the operating system. You can, on Windows, you can right-click a file, go properties and make it read-only. And by default, Comet respects this setting and refuses to overwrite the existing file in this case. And I think this is a sensible baseline behavior. The file was set as read-only for probably a good reason. But we have encountered situations where Comet should restore the file regardless. And so as a result, Comet 24.11 Dione adds a new allow read-only files to be overwritten checkbox here. And so it's off by default because we think you should respect the file permissions. But if you do need to overwrite a read-only file, or if you do a restore and you get errors saying, oh, the files are read-only, turn on this checkbox and it's here if you need it. Hyper-V and VMware quotas. So this is just a quick slide. So Comet works with a wide range of service providers. We work with highly managed, high-touch partners and some, low management, low-touch partners, and everywhere in between. And for VM backups, when you do a Hyper-V or VMware backup in Comet, we do charge per VM up to a limit per host. And if you are the kind of service provider who offers the software directly and just gives the customer the installer, if your customer suddenly starts backing up additional VMs, that can incur a charge on you that you want to then on-charge to the customer. And so this is different depending on how closely involved you are with your customers. If you want to restrict your customer from backing up additional virtual machines to put a cap on your service costs. So to support this, we have added a quota feature for the number of virtual machines. And adding this quota limit to your customer accounts will ensure that as a service provider, you are in control of how many virtual machines your customers are allowed to back up. And that just puts a cap on your costs as a service provider and makes things more predictable from a billing standpoint. Okay, I'm going to run through a range of smaller features affecting the Comet Server web interface. So first of all is a new feature on the settings page to copy and paste settings. So We recently revisited our pricing earlier in the year, and we had a lot of questions from people looking to move from the self-hosted Comet server to Comet-Hosted, or Comet-Hosted to self-hosted, vice versa. And part of that is just about making it as easy as possible to migrate from one Comet server to another. Earlier this year, we added new features for storage migration, and that just leaves settings migration. So if you're trying to migrate from one server to another, and both of your servers are upgraded to the latest Comet 24.11 Dione release, it's easy. You log in as an admin, you go to the settings page, click copy on one server and paste on the other. And you'll get presented with a list of all the changes that will be applied, so it's safe to try this out. You get a chance to double check everything. Another new feature in Comet 24.11 Dione is the ability to bulk assign policies to user accounts. So earlier this year, we added bulk actions to the user list table. And it's since that bulk actions button was added, it's just been a matter of time before we expand it out with more capabilities. Especially for our larger partners, MSPs and IT companies that have a lot of user accounts, being able to manipulate them in bulk is a great time saver. So Comet has long supported the policies system, and policies let you keep sort of settings and permissions in sync across many users. And so that sort of mini user management, it's a great match for the new bulk actions capability. And so you can expect us to add more different types of bulk actions here soon. So to use this feature on the user list page, you just checkbox users, click bulk actions, assign policy, you get a pop-up asking which policy to assign, click OK, done, simple as that. Next, okay, so this is a note that once again, this came from the feature voting system. So this is a user requested feature. The Comet supports UNC paths for SMB network shares. So Windows network shares, Samba file servers. Actually, lots of cloud products support the SMB protocol these days. So in this picture, Comet is backing up data from an SMB share as part of a files and folders protected item. So we've got Comet installed somewhere and it's reaching into an SMB share and backing up files over the network. The SMB credentials can sometimes be a bit complicated to get right. And so we introduced this new test connections button here, which will verify that, on the client device, can its service user account actually access that share and see the files inside it. The Comet has had test connection buttons in various places throughout the user interface for many years now, but we've been tracking down the missing ones and adding them, and I think we've got them all now. If you do see somewhere you think Comet could possibly add a test connection button, and if we don't have one, let us know. Raise a feature request or a support ticket, and we will make it happen, because it just saves so much time on troubleshooting. Without this button, you sort of have to run the backup and check if there was a permissions error, but now with the test connections button, just do the check, don't have to run the whole job, and it's much faster to see if things are working. Next slide. We are pleased to announce that Comet-Hosted is now available in Australia. So viewers of this webinar, you are maybe already aware, but when you choose to start running Comet, you need a management console and of either kind. One option is the self-hosted Comet server, and you can take that installer and run it on your own premises or on your own cloud. Or if you don't want to manage your own infrastructure, you can use our Comet-hosted server in the Amazon AWS cloud. And with the addition of Australia to this list, if you want a Comet-hosted server, you now have the choice of 5 different locations to choose when selecting where the Comet-hosted server should be located. And so we cover multiple locations in the US and the EU. And just to clarify, Comet-hosted isn't the storage system. This is just the management console. So you should pair this with a storage provider, maybe something like a local storage provider or one of the big international ones, Wasabi, Backblaze B2, or our own Comet storage platform. It's best if you can pick a storage provider that's in your local region, as that gives you the best performance for backups and restores. Now, our Comet storage platform supports any Wasabi data center region, including the EU, US, Australia, and more besides. I think this is my last slide. So translations. Now, the Comet backup product is available in 15 languages. With one click, you can experience Comet in, I'm not going to read them out today. And with one click, you can experience Comet in any one of these languages. And this applies to the admin web interface, the user web interface, the customer desktop app, even the email reports that go out to customers. Even some API codes and API response messages are completely localized. We're quite proud of this translation system, and we hear great feedback from people using Comet in their local language. But it is a fact that our staff mostly only speak English. So we would appreciate any local experts who want to fix and improve the translation support. If you use Comet in another language and you see a typo, or if you want to help us by translating Comet into another language that's not yet supported, then all of the details are available on our GitHub page. It's github.com/cometbackup/translations. It's very easy to get started, follow the instructions, and together we can improve Comet for customers in your local country. So that's all we have for today. Any questions? Okay, there's a question here asking, is ButterFS supported for snapshots or full disk backups? It will do the full disk backup, yes, and you can take a snapshot using our custom backup snap driver. However, we can't do the free disk space skipping on ButterFS, and that's partly because ButterFS is a developing file system that is improving over time, but it's also partly the file system somewhat complicated to, or rather current Linux kernels do not report free disk space information on an extent basis for ButterFS. So this is technically, it's an upstream issue, but maybe we could try and work around it ourselves. But ButterFS backups do work. They're just not quite as efficient as ext4 or XFS backups. There's another question here. Will more bulk actions be added in the future? Absolutely yes. I am aware of 2 or 3 that are going to land in the very next Voyager release. So please stay tuned. There's another question here. Will Comet-Hosted be added to any other regions? In particular, so this is based on demand, I think. So if you are interested in Comet-Hosted in another region, please let us know. We'll gauge the demand, and once we have sort of enough build-up of demand, we're happy to launch it. It's not, the process, our sysadmin team is pretty good at spinning up new regions these days. So it's a somewhat straightforward process for us, but there's an economic argument based on a certain number of minimum customers using the region. That's why Australia has, we got there a little bit after doing the US and EU, of course. The AWS in particular, as I mentioned, is just one part of the equation in terms of performance. And really the key thing for customer experience is that the storage location is located as close to the customers as possible in the same country. And that affects not just performance, but also legal, data sovereignty requirements in many countries these days. And so even though the Comet-hosted server is available in these 5 regions, you can almost certainly find a storage provider available in hundreds of regions, and that's really the essential thing. So one last question. There's a question here about, are there any top feature requests you can tell us about? You're absolutely welcome to check out the feature voting page and see what's most highly upvoted, and that will not exactly correspond to our plans for next year, but it will give you some pretty big hints. And for instance, I mentioned this earlier, but we are absolutely aware of the changes to Broadcom and VMware's corporate ownership structure and the effects that's had on the hypervisor market. We've seen that the Proxmox backup feature request has crossed over a pretty big number of upvotes, so that's absolutely something we're talking about internally. I think that's all the questions we have time for today, but we still want to hear from you. If you have any questions at all, we're always happy to help out. We're more than happy to hear your questions by ticket through the usual ticket system in the Comet account portal, or you can email us, hello@cometbackup.com. Or do you know we do support phone calls? So our company is based in New Zealand. We've got support teams for round-the-clock technical support, but if you want a sales call or if you want any more advanced technical support or troubleshooting, we'll need to figure out a good time that suits both of us. We're more than happy to jump on a call, and often that's a very quick way of clearing the air and getting answers to any questions you might have. So that's all from us here at Comet Backup. Hopefully you've managed to take away some useful information. Please check out the latest version of Comet 24.11 Dione. All users of the previous quarterly series, 24.8 Tethys and earlier, you're encouraged to upgrade, but you're more than welcome to keep using older quarterly versions if you feel like it. So I hope you're all keeping well and safe, and you can expect another webinar for the next quarterly release in 3 months' time. Cheers.